The routine settled quietly after the family visit. To everyone else, nothing had changed. At university, Kinjira remained the same composed professor, precise, distant, controlled. At home, she was still careful, still reserved. But to Dao Nua, the difference was noticeable now. Not dramatic, just small things. A lunchbox waiting on the kitchen counter in the morning. A short text during the day. Did you eat? Or Kim waiting in the living room when Dao returned late from campus. Nothing romantic, just attentive. And somehow that made everything more complicated. One afternoon at the university, Dao arrived early for class. Students were already chatting inside the lecture hall. She took her usual seat in the third row and opened her notebook. Then she noticed something strange. Near the professor's desk stood a student from another department, a girl Dao had seen before, confident, stylish, the type who enjoyed attention. She was leaning casually against Kim's desk. "Professor, I'm still confused about the research proposal," the girl said. Her voice carried just enough sweetness to make it noticeable. Kim stood beside the desk, reviewing a document. "If you have academic questions," she replied calmly, "submit them through email. But it's easier to understand when you explain it." Dao watched silently. The girl leaned closer, just slightly, close enough that the gesture looked intentional. Most professors would step back. Kim didn't. She simply continued explaining the concept in the same neutral tone. But Dao suddenly found herself gripping her pen harder than necessary. She didn't know why it bothered her. Kim wasn't doing anything inappropriate. She was just teaching. Still, the girl laughed softly at something Kim said. Dao's jaw tightened. When class started, the girl finally left. Kim began the lecture as usual. "Today we'll review the case analysis." Her voice was steady, professional, yet halfway through the lecture, her gaze shifted briefly toward Dao. Just a second, but it felt like she had noticed something. Dao immediately looked down at her notes. Later that afternoon, Dao walked out of the classroom with her friends. The same girl from earlier passed by them in the hallway. She smiled faintly. "Professor Kim is really patient," the girl commented casually. Dao forced a polite smile. "Yes, she's very professional." "Lucky you," the girl said lightly. "You get to take more classes with her." Dao didn't reply. She just kept walking. That evening, when Dao returned home, the house was quiet again. The families had already left earlier that week, yet they hadn't returned to separate rooms. No one had suggested it, and somehow it felt easier not to mention it. Kim was sitting at the desk again, laptop open, glasses resting low on her nose. She looked tired. "You're late," Kim said without looking up. "Group project meeting." Dao placed her bag on the chair and hesitated. Then she spoke casually. "You had a student asking questions before class today." Kim paused. "Yes?" She seemed persistent. Now Kim looked up. Her expression was unreadable. "That happens," she said. Dao nodded slowly. "Of course." The conversation ended there, but something had shifted. Later that night, Dao stepped out onto the balcony to get some air. The evening breeze cooled her face. She didn't hear the door open behind her until Kim spoke. "You're quieter than usual tonight." Dao leaned against the railing. "Am I?" "Yes." Kim stepped beside her. For a moment, they simply stood there, watching the city lights. Then Dao said, almost absent-mindedly, "That student today seems to admire you." Kim's brow lifted slightly. "I'm a professor. Students often admire teachers." Dao exhaled softly. "I guess." Another pause. Kim turned toward her. "Did that bother you?" Dao blinked. "What?" "You noticed her. Several times." Dao looked away immediately. It's none of my business. But you're my wife. The sentence came out before Kim could stop herself. Both of them froze. The word hung in the air between them. Wife. Dao slowly turned back toward her. Only legally, she said quietly. Kim's gaze softened. Yes, she admitted, but neither of them stepped away. The distance between them felt suddenly smaller. Too small. Dao's hair moved slightly in the breeze, brushing across her cheek. Without thinking, Kim reached out. Her fingers gently caught the strand of hair and tucked it behind Dao's ear. The touch was light, careful, but it lingered. Dao's breath hitched. Their eyes met. Neither of them moved. The city noise faded into the background. Kim realized suddenly how close they were standing, close enough to feel each other's breath, close enough that if either of them leaned forward, Dao swallowed. Kim. It was the first time she had said her name, not Professor, just Kim. Something in Kim's chest tightened. Her hand was still resting lightly against Dao's cheek. For one brief second, the thought crossed both their minds. What if they kissed? The possibility was terrifying and strangely tempting. Kim's gaze dropped briefly to Dao's lips. Dao noticed. Her heartbeat jumped. But the moment became too real, too dangerous. They stepped back at the same time, both embarrassed. Dao laughed softly, covering her face. That was awkward. Kim cleared her throat. Yes. A long pause followed. Neither knew where to look. Finally, Dao said, "We should probably sleep." Probably, Kim agreed. They walked back inside the room quietly. Nothing more happened that night. But when the lights were turned off and they lay on opposite sides of the bed, neither of them fell asleep quickly, because something had changed again. Jealousy had appeared, and so had something else, something that felt a lot like the beginning of desire. The days after the almost kiss became strangely quiet, not awkward exactly, just careful. At university, Kimjira returned to her usual composed self. Her lectures were sharp, structured, and efficient. No one in class would ever guess she had nearly crossed the boundary on her own balcony a few nights earlier. Not even Dao Nua. Or at least, that's what they pretended. Dao sat in her usual seat in the third row, writing notes, occasionally glancing toward the front of the classroom. Whenever their eyes met, both looked away first. It was subtle, but noticeable, at least to them. That